Welcome to The Author Show, where we present new authors and books. From fiction to self-help and everything in between, you'll find it all here. To watch the TV version of our program, visit authorswebtv.com. That's authorswebtv.com. And now, let the show begin with your hosts, Don McCauley and Danielle Hampson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming the program author Maggie Van Galen, and Maggie is the author of The Adventures of Keno and Ernest. Maggie grew up in northern Michigan listening to her father's stories, imagining the characters being transported to the locations and engaging in the plots. She discovered that she too had the creativity to put her thoughts to paper and always used writing as a sort of escapism. After years of telling stories to her boys and their friends, Maggie decided to share them with the world. Maggie, how are you?
I'm great, Don. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Well, let's start with a big question. Tell us about this book, please.
Well, it's a children's series called The Adventures of Keno and Ernest, like you mentioned, and there's two books, The Banana Tree and The Diamond Mine. Both books follow the same characters. Keno is a very mischievous little monkey that always seems to be getting himself into trouble. But thankfully for him, he has Ernest, who's his best friend, a wise elephant. And they're basically navigating the adventures in the jungle, adventures of life in the jungle, learning some very valuable life lessons, some moral lessons, and having a really fun adventure along the way.
Who did you write the books for specifically?
Well, I wrote the books sort of twofold. One is for my children. I have two boys, ages 11 and 9, and I wrote the books for them specifically. I've told the stories for years. Once my oldest son was born, I started telling the stories. But I also wrote it for my father. As you mentioned in my intro there, my dad used to tell me stories about Keno and Ernest. And unfortunately, I don't remember the stories, and he never wrote them down before he passed away. But I do remember the characters and the fun that I had listening to his stories. So, in essence, I wrote the book for him too, or with him.
Would you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying themes that you could say run throughout the books?
Yeah, I think that the books themselves teach fun, teach friendship, and teach family values to children. And I think that's probably the central theme that runs through both books, is that I always try to make the books and the stories fun for the kids. It teaches about friendship and how important it is to rely on good friends and to have good friends. And then there's always a moral, a family value moral at the end of the story that each child will learn by reading the story.
Now, if you could compare this book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
Well, I think there's two series of books that I personally really like, and I think also tie in well with The Adventures of Keno and Ernest that the readers will be familiar with. The first, the messages, the moral messages of my stories sort of follow along in line with the Berenstain Bears series of books that discuss bullying and friendship and different issues that kids may be dealing with at different stages of their life. So that would be one. My other sort of book that I would like to compare it to is Chris Van Duzen's children's books, like Learning to Ski with Mr. McGee and If I Built a Car. The character expressionism in those books I love the books, and I love the expressions that the characters portray. So I think and I hope that the readers will see a lot of expression in Keno and Ernest's illustrations as well.
What do you really enjoy about writing children's books?
Well, Don, I have to say that I am a storyteller before a writer, and I love telling stories and seeing the reactions of the children when I read the stories. I've read to probably over 3,500 kids in different schools and club settings, and the reactions that I get from them are amazing, and it's really great. I'll give you an example. I was in a inner city school in Grand Rapids this time last year, and I was reading to a school, and it was kindergarten through 5th grade, all sitting in the cafeteria listening to the story. And I always start my stories by having them close their eyes and imagine that they're in the jungle and use their imagination to transport themselves. And to sit there and look down at kids closing their eyes, and you could see that they were just really, really there. with me on the story. And after I finished reading the story, one of the kids came up to me, and he was a fifth grader, and he was probably my height, so he was a big, 5'7" kid. And he said, "Hey, can you make any money at this?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. It depends on how hard you want to work." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And I figure that if my books or my writing has inspired any child to pick up a pen, go to the library, read a book, instead of choosing, a tougher course of life, then I've been completely successful. And that's why I enjoy writing children's books.
Where did you learn to tell stories?
I think I got the gift of telling stories from my father. He was an amazing raconteur, if you will, and would completely transport you to wherever his stories would be.